Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Yesterday was election day, but in political terms, it turned out to be more like Judgment Day. Yeah, it's deja vu all over again. I had said that this election was shaping up to be a repeat of 2016, and that's how it turned out. And while Kamala Harris didn't make all the same mistakes that Hillary Clinton made, she managed to make a number of mistakes that amounted to the same thing. Now, the takeaway from all of this is, if the Democrats had fought for and stuck up for black voters the same way they do for the Israelis and illegal aliens from south of the border, then they wouldn't have lost the presidency and both houses of Congress in a single night. You see, that's the Democrats' entire MO. They stick up for illegal aliens and foreign countries, but not for black Americans. That's deliberate. They want to make it excruciatingly clear that they are far more concerned about people who aren't even citizens than they are about black Americans right here at home. That's how determined Democrats are to ignore us. They will gladly commit political suicide if they think it's going to mean ignoring black voters. So we return the favor. Now, on a side note, truth be told, I went to bed about my normal time last night because my hopes and dreams didn't hinge on the outcome of this election. We in the black grassroots, we have an agenda of our own, and we're going to keep pursuing that regardless of the outcome. But for the result to be what it was is significant in that it makes a direct connection between black voter anger and the Democrats' defeat. And to have immediate consequences for ignoring us is important. The white media will never admit this because they're determined to never do anything that validates our power. But it's important that we know this. Okay, let me say this right off the bat. The orange man's victory changes nothing for us on reparations. It may be good on immigration if he takes a hard line on that one, but if his first term is any indication, he'll be more talk than action on that one. Remember, Republicans cater to the corporations who rely on illegal immigrants as cheap labor, and the banking interests who also rely on them for those remittance fees. If Trump truly wanted to stop illegal immigration dead, he would punish the businesses who employ these illegals, the landlords who give them places to live, and he would push legislation to stop banks from letting them send money home. But since everybody makes so much money off of it, I doubt that's going to happen, especially since these are donors to Trump. So while I think that there could potentially be some peripheral policy changes regarding black folks that might be beneficial, the truth of the matter is any of the big stuff is not going to be happening under Trump any more than it would have under Kamala Harris, but at the very least, if we cannot all be equally comfortable, we're all going to be equally uncomfortable. That's the takeaway from this election. The most important thing I want you to remember and that I want you to let people know is the black vote did this. Let it be known. The black vote did this and no one else. They want to blame us, you're doggone right. You can go ahead and blame the black vote. If there's anger about this, then I want you to stoke it. I want you to throw it in their faces and tell them, yeah, we did this to you. People run around like Nina Turner terrified. They're going to be blaming black men for this. Good. I've been saying that ever since she said those words. Good. I hope they blame us. I want them to. When they sit there and go, black men, you didn't turn out. You did this to us. Them brothers, you take credit for that. You tell them you're damn right. We are to blame. We did this to you. You insulted us. You disrespected us. You ignored our interests. You tried to pretend like we didn't exist. You prioritized everybody over us. So this is the clapback. We chose to stay home. You can call us all the names you want. Call us anything you want, but the one name you also better call us is the swing vote. And the same thing goes for black women too. Sisters, you better be sure to tell those scumbags when they say, well, them black men, they're to blame for this. When Shea Butter Twitter comes crawling out of their refrigerators and starts saying, well, these black men, they to blame. You tell them, hey, the brothers didn't do it alone. We had to help. This was a group effort, family. Black men and black women stood together on business. This was the black vote replicating exactly what we did in 2016. We showed that we can tip the scales in the Democrats' favor or against them. They've ignored us for years and years, and we showed that we could punish them by ignoring them for a single night. A lot of these folks who are out there desperately hoping and crossing their fingers, twisting their fingers into knots is more like it, desperately hoping that they could conjure magic with phony headlines about Kamala Harris being up 10 points in this state, she's up 5 points in Iowa, etc., etc. They were trying all their tricks and it didn't work. So what's happened here is an enormous political humiliation for all of them. This is going to be remembered as the greatest single political comeback in American history. Nothing even comes close. I wish it hadn't happened for the orange man because he's not representing our interests, but the truth of the matter is it wouldn't have happened at all if Democrats had treated black voters like a crucial constituency instead of defying us, insulting us, and ignoring us. Now they're reaping the results. They chose to prioritize AIPAC, and AIPAC went ahead and supported the Republicans. They did it to themselves. Donald Trump won all of the battleground states. We'll get to the particulars in a moment, but this is the failure of the Biden-Harris administration. They've lost the presidency in both houses of Congress in a single night. Trump and his MAGA lunatics are going to come into office controlling the executive and legislative branches, and because white fragility is the core of the white identity in America, they'll be doing all kinds of performative extremist crap just to prove that they're quote-unquote in charge. But you know what? For black folks, it's only going to amount to a somewhat louder, much more obnoxious version of the same benign neglect we've been subjected to for the last 4 years. Those of you who are saying, but Trump, he gonna let the cops kill black folks. What the hell do you think Kamala and Biden have been doing? The numbers of black people killed by the thugs in blue has actually been higher for the last 4 years than it was under Donald Trump. And what the hell have Kamala and Biden been doing about that? Flooding the police with more money, rewarding them for it, that's what. At least under Trump, when black people get killed, black folks are actually going to say, you know what, whoever's in that White House needs to be held accountable. People actually get off their butts about it. They can't roll over in bed or turn on the TV or change the channel or hit the snooze button or what have you. They can't do that. With Trump in there, they might feel like they actually have to get off their butts and do something. And that is something that we have needed. And a lot of them are scared of that because they're lazy. They don't want to have to actually fight for anything, not even for themselves. So that being the case, now they're being faced with a proposition. Either you're going to fight or you'll be killed where you stand. I think they'll do like they did in 2020. A lot of folks who have been sitting back doing nothing, suddenly they're going to get galvanized. But speaking of lack of galvanization, I for one simply cannot believe that the Democrats' strategy of insulting black voters didn't work. I mean, the finger wagging and the insults and the lecturing, all of this in the home stretch to the election. I simply can't believe that bringing out bootlicking celebrities who do not live near us and have nothing in common with us when it comes to our economics, Negroes who think that they've escaped blackness like Magic Johnson, or bringing out a washed-up, pathetic has-been former president to sit there and call him, I'm talking to the brothers. Well, you ain't even one of the brothers, so don't worry about it. Or bringing out his wrinkled up hag of a wife to condescend to those voters. I simply can't believe that that didn't get black voters to do an about face and vote for nothing. I mean, gee, if that kind of thing doesn't work, nothing will, right? See, Republicans don't do things like that. No matter how wrong and irrational the GOP base is, and their base is bat crap crazy, the Republicans don't finger wag at their people. They don't lecture them, they don't talk down to them or disrespect them. They do the opposite. They stick by their lunatic fringe base no matter what. That's why their base sticks by them. Democrats, on the other hand, they make it their mission to attack the people who they claim to represent simply because those people demand the things they need. So both parties work together to maintain a racist status quo. Republicans fight for what the dominant society wants, and the Democrats openly refuse to do anything about it. And that brings us to Kamala Harris. Oh yeah, they went ahead and tried to switch horses in midstream, and they wound up losing, just not by as much. Kamala Harris thought that she could BS her way through the election. She's still no better than the local Oakland-level attorney that she was 35 years ago. She was never any higher caliber than a county courthouse-level mind. She was in way over her head. This is what happens when she doesn't have the California political machine behind her. When she doesn't have her boyfriend, low-down Willie Brown, to go ahead and say, Trump, don't crowd Kamala, Trump, don't crowd Kamala. She wasn't able to do any of that. They didn't have the California political machine to put its thumb on the scales. She had to come out here into the rest of the country and face black voters who were actually the majority in these cities, or in many cases at least tip voters at the state level, and this is who she had to contend with. And what she found was the shucking and jiving that she did, the talking in circles, that don't fly. The Democrats are finding out the hard way. They're in a very different political environment now. People are demanding that they get yeses to their questions, not talking around their questions. And if you attempt it, they'll turn their backs on you. This is what happens when you raise the political IQ of a group. Kamala Harris did everything she could to limit her interview to friendly outlets, and even her Fox News interview was cut short. Her Democrat handlers knew that she was a problem, that she sucks at interviews, she has no answers, so their plan was to try to hide her away, limit her exposure, and pray to God that she could fly under the radar. You had all these people sitting here going, well, the election, it's going to be close. Turned out it wasn't that close at all, was it? Trump positioned himself once again as the vehicle for voter grievance. Angry white people who the system is always produced for can whine about what little they hallucinate about not getting. But disaffected Democrats who are tired of having to fight against the very Democrats they put into office, they could use Trump as their way to punish Democrats and their supporters. This was the Democrats' race to lose. But they've shown that they're totally suicidally devoted to defying their base. Democracy was not on the ballot, no matter what the white media may tell you. Getting black voters to accept nothing, that's what was on the ballot. Well, we turned it down. I don't know about you, but for the last few months, we were told that Kamala's victory was supposed to be guaranteed. Then, as we've gotten closer to Election Day, a new narrative began to emerge. It's going to be neck and neck, and we won't be able to call the winner for days after the election because it will take that long to tally all the votes. That's what they've been saying, isn't it? That Kamala and Trump have been so close in the polls that it would be impossible to know the winner in one night. Well, as with so much else the white media said, they were dead wrong. And by the way, Alan Lichtman, the guy with his so-called keys to the presidency that the white media's been making so much hullabaloo about, this guy's been saying that Kamala's going to win. And the white media's just been hyping this guy as being a fortune teller, and his presidential prediction system is foolproof, remember? Well, it turned out that he was the fool. Speaking of wrong, there was talk about Kamala being ahead of Trump in an Iowa poll. The woman who's responsible for that poll, her credibility also went down the toilet because she was saying that Kamala was going to win by 3 points. Instead, Trump won the state by 6. If there's anyone who's proven that he can defy political gravity, it's the Orange Man. All of those people with their wishful thinking and their superstitions and their make-believe about election results, their old wives' tales about this election and what it would hinge on, dead wrong, all of them. And these are supposed to be the experts. The one thing that none of them dared to admit is that this election would hinge on black voter turnout, which is the same thing it always hinges on. If you can galvanize enough black people in large enough numbers in those swing states, the Democrats win. Trying to be the party of the coast doesn't work. But if they actually come into the interior states, they actually have to deal with black voters head on. They've determined that they're not going to do that. So they chose to lose. That's what they chose to do. They have simply proved what we've known all along. For the white left, they're not running against the Republicans. They're running against anything that they think would empower black people. The lesson to be learned here is when you make insulting the black community the foundation of your presidential campaign, you will lose badly. Kamala Harris has to live with the fact that she lost the election to a guy who tried to overthrow the government 4 years ago. She's going to have to live with that, and so will Joe Biden, and so will Barack Obama, and so will Michelle Obama, and the rest of those fakers, frauds, phonies, and fools. They got to live with this. Yeah, this is the send-off for Barack Obama that he should have gotten. A second humiliating defeat at the hands of the Orange Man. That's the lesson to be learned here. You spit in the black community's face, and what will happen is they'll stay home. Abortion will not be a substitute for having an actual black agenda. Offering black people weed and crypto ain't gonna cut it. Rahm Emanuel and his Biden Republicans failed to materialize. There will be no end run around the black vote is what this election proves. And you're not going to insult or humiliate us to the polls either. Ask Donald Trump how that went for him in 2020. He antagonized black voters for 4 straight years. And in 2020, black voters in the midst of a pandemic turned out and threw him out. That's why he learned to keep his mouth shut this time around. When Steve Bannon got out of prison this week, the first thing Bannon did was start doing a pretend solidarity with black prisoners. Bannon's a good old boy from Virginia. And it was all a pathetic act, but it goes to show that even he recognized that this election would hinge on whether black voters turned out in large numbers. So rather than antagonize black voters, it was best to keep their mouths shut. And considering the fact that Donald Trump is desperately hoping to keep himself out of prison, that's the reason why he decided he wasn't going to be running his mouth about the black community like he did when he was president. Now back to Kamala. She did everything she could to avoid facing black voters. Holding political rallies where she had nothing but celebrities out there. That was the reason people were showing up. People were showing up to see the stars. They weren't showing up to see Kamala Harris. In fact, as soon as she took the stage, people started booing at her. That's because they didn't care about her. She didn't have anything to offer. People came to see Jennifer Lopez. They came to see Beyonce. They came to see Meg Thee Stallion. They weren't there to see Kamala Harris. But that's what she thought. She was hoping that would be a substitute. Well, they're not here to see me. At least they'll be here to see something, right? It doesn't work. That simply doesn't work. Setting up rallies and staged political theater at black barbershops is no substitute for the lack of black support that you got. And making sure whoever is at these meetings isn't going to ask any tough questions about anything that black people care about, that's a surefire way to show black people they can just stay home. See, Kamala thought that she was brilliantly dodging black concerns and manufacturing good optics for herself. I got these black people in front of me, and they're going to sit here and tell me how great I am, and I'm going to tell them, you know what? I feel your pain. Whatever is good for the black community is good for America. Instead, what we heard was a whole bunch of gibberish, a whole bunch of word salad. She reinforced and re-emphasized that she wasn't offering us anything. That's all we heard. She was sitting there talking a whole lot of nothing, and those bootlicking Negroes who sat there with their shucking and jiving what they're exposed to. Next time you see Charlemagne the Fraud, do be sure to remind him of that. Because he's one of the fakers, frauds, phonies, and fools that I'm constantly talking about. He tries to pretend like he's down with the black community. But when it came time for him to talk to Kamala Harris, he stuck to the same script as the rest of these shills do. For all the good it did Kamala. And by the way, the breakfast schlubs, they've proven that the road to the White House doesn't lead through their little studio either. That little Chitlin circuit outhouse that they got. And the same thing goes for these do-nothing, know-nothing outlets like the so-called Shade Room. Yeah, bootlick media's proving they don't have any influence. So the strategy of surrounding oneself with a bunch of suck-ups and bootlicks and sellouts, that won't work. But I do hope that the same shills, Democrat plants, and operatives who finally crawled out of their holes to stump for Kamala the last few months, I do hope that they dredge up the courage to call themselves confronting us about this election. How come y'all let Trump win? We'd love to tell them all about it. After Kamala was handed the nomination in July, because she didn't actually earn it, she didn't win any primaries, didn't even have a convention vote. After the nomination was handed to her by the DNC bigwigs, I had so many of these shills and plants who were attacking my video about the rise and fall of Kamala Harris and saying, this video didn't age very well. Unfortunately for them, like everything else about the black media, it aged like fine wine, and I'm having a good time forcing them to drink it. As the black media, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is telling people what's going to happen before it occurs, making sure that black people are forewarned. Shills and bootlicks can't do that. They're not about telling you what's going to happen. They're about telling you what their white paymasters want to happen. Democrats want to win, but they want to do it without offering black voters anything. So they try to scare us to the polls, terrify us to the polls, shame us to the polls, anything except actually incentivize us to go to the polls. That's the one thing they're determined not to do. Black voters demanded results from Biden and Harris, and the only thing Kamala was offering us was vibes. Okay, so that's what we gave her. You take these vibes to the polls, Kamala. You don't need votes. You need vibes, Kamala. So you take them vibes to the polls, and she sees how far those vibes got her. All the people who were confidently predicting that Trump would lose, the usual phony headlines saying that the orange man was nervous, a lot of these bootlicks like Van Jones and Simone Sanders are humiliated today. But I think that nobody's more humiliated right now than Barack Obama. Last night's election was a complete and thorough repudiation of him. They were all saying that after this Donald Trump would be gone forever. But instead, now it's Barack and Michelle who are gone. This is the second time in a row that the biracial bootlick has proven that he's not a political kingmaker. He certainly cannot swing the black vote. He told black people we have to protect his legacy, and instead, we destroyed it. Because a two-bit bootlick like him deserves to leave the political stage under a cloud of humiliation and shame, and that's exactly how we're sending him out the door. Kamala's entire political strategy was to run on abortion and to run away from any tough questions. She tried sticking to her pathetic fellow sellouts like Charlemagne the Fraud and the Shade Room and others. You want to reach black voters, you can't do it through bootlicks and bussy media. You have to go through the black media. But Kamala was desperately hoping against hope that these asinine puppets for the DNC, for the white media rather, would enable her to reach some of the black people who the black media has been influencing and talking to, and that's you. That's what this is about. It was them carpet bombing you with propaganda in the hopes that you would go for it. And family, this is the reason why I tell you not to make it a habit to be listening to bootlick media on a regular basis. But Kamala's attempts to do an end run around the black media failed because the Shade Room speaks for the LGBT movement and intersectionalists. And as for Charlemagne the Fraud, he doesn't speak for anyone at all. Kamala made it a point to tell black people she wasn't going to do anything that benefited us. So we showed her that we wouldn't do anything that benefited her. And I gotta say something about Roly-Poly Martin. You know that no post-mortem about this election would be complete without bringing him in for some abuse. Roly-Poly famously said that the Democrats needed to forget about all of those younger black voters and focus on the old ones. Yeah, because these are the only people who actually would give him a pat on the back, so that's kind of his base. Never mind the fact that the black boomers are dying out. Well, Democrats followed Roly-Poly's advice to a T. And the young black voters stayed home. And what did Roly do? He's been out here dry begging for a consulting gig on every outlet foolish enough to have him on. He went from saying that younger black voters were irrelevant to now saying that only he could help the Democrats do messaging that would reach those very younger black voters that he called irrelevant and said should be ignored. And he wonders why Democrats don't hire him to consult on campaigns for him. This is the incompetent operative class at work. The white media was covering this event like a sports event, like it was the Super Bowl, and it just goes to show how the professional wrestling spectacle of modern politics lends itself to being just another arena for empty media hype. Les Moonves, the disgraced former head of CBS, said it best, Trump may not be good for democracy, but he's great for ratings. The white media are an example of a group who's made it where no matter who loses, they win. When Trump won in 2016, you had Democrats like Rachel Maddow and others who were positioning themselves as some sort of half-brained resistance to him. Her ratings soared as a result. Even though a lot of these people who were calling Trump out for 4 years, they had previously been bumping elbows with him on his show, The Apprentice, which was on NBC, by the way. Keith Olbermann made a cottage industry out of going on profane, foul-mouthed rants against Trump, even though previously he had been friends with Trump. This is what happens when you become a prisoner of your own power, quote-unquote. When you cocoon yourself off from reality, you surround yourself with a bunch of yes-men, bootlicks, and suck-ups, and you decide that you're going to furnish your entire existence with nothing but a bunch of feel-good propaganda telling you what you want to hear. You think that you can keep reality out, but reality always has the last word. White media reports early on were that there was enormous turnout for early voting, unprecedented turnout, which the white media always claims. They always say that voter turnout for early voting is unprecedented. They always do that. It's all hype and hyperbole. But the reality is that early voter turnout was higher in 2020. 4 years ago, 100 million Americans had voted early. This year, the early voter number was 80 million. That's 20 million voters less than it was 4 years ago. That's the real bellwether of how things were going to go, but the white media didn't talk about that. And they're not going to be talking about it now. It's worth noting because higher voter turnout benefits Democrats. The more people who turn out to vote, the higher the chance Democrats will win, while lower voter turnout favors Republicans. But understand something. When the white media talks about higher voter turnout, they're not talking about illegals or they're not talking about the LGBT vote. They're talking about the black vote. Higher voter turnout means if they can galvanize a critical mass of black people to turn out, if they can get black people enthused about going to the polls. But as usual, they do everything they can to avoid saying black. They know exactly what the truth is, but they also know that the truth terrifies them. The reality is black voter turnout was down. This means that the black voter turnout is less than it was 4 years ago. That's what decided the election. 4 years ago, I told you that trying to use Trump to scare black people wouldn't work 4 years later. That's why I said in 2020, go back in the archives of this channel, go back and listen to my post-2020 election Post-Mortem, where I explained what happened. And I explained that what happened was black folks got scared to the polls. The Democrats successfully terrified black people into voting. But I also said that that trick would only work one time. In 2016, Democrats saw what happened when black voters were angry. In 2020, black voters showed what happens when they're scared. Well, this time around, black voters were angry again. And this was the result. It was 2016 all over again. But Kamala Harris, trying to find new and inventive ways to deny reality, actually getting out there with Liz Cheney, Hillary, Meg Thee Stallion, Beyonce, Jennifer Lopez, Magic Johnson, she was hoping that star power would make up for her complete lack of charisma or ideas, but it didn't. And she was sitting here embracing AIPAC to the hilt. Now, if she had given that same support to black voters, then she would have won easily. The leftists worldwide who are shrieking in agony right now, they're not going to blame the Democrats for ignoring the base. None of them will blame the leadership for spitting in black voters' faces. None of them will connect those dots or tell Democrats, you got to start respecting and obeying the black vote or you'll be in the political wilderness forever. They're not going to do that because these white left mouthpieces are also in league with oppressing black people. So they'll join in the lie of blaming everything and everyone except for black people and ignore the pig simple obvious reason that Democrats lost this election. These mouthpieces know the rules of racism. They know what team they're on. It's team white supremacy. Now, before we go any farther, we should go ahead and take a bow. We put some pain on the bastards. We crushed Kamala's presidential dreams. Maybe I should make a follow-up video called The Rise and Fall of Kamala again. All of her sleeping around with Willie Brown, all of her weaponizing every political office she ever held to go after black people, all the lies she told when she denied it, claiming she was a black woman, all the fools who did everything they could to support her, all of it for nothing. Now, this doesn't mean that these anti-black forces are going to do an about-face. Please don't think they're going to discover religion any more than they did in 2016. This second devastating loss to the orange man isn't going to prompt them to come to us and make a deal of any sort, or to start talking like they got some sense. They weren't doing it before the election. They're not going to do it now. Let's be realistic about that. So I'm going to take the suspense out of this one for you. They're not about to change their talking points. They're scared now. This wasn't supposed to happen. They had to acknowledge the effect that we've had on the electorate, and that was something that angered them, because it meant that a critical mass of black people have now unplugged from this treadmill that they've had us on. That angered them. We're supposed to only obey. They're supposed to have the ability to conjure magic. They're supposed to be able to print their phony headlines and we just believe them. That's how the white media works. They were supposed to be proving to themselves and everyone that they have the ability to conjure magic. They can create reality out of whole cloth merely with their headlines. They say it and that makes it real. Or they say something and it makes it false. And speaking of false, let's kill that stupid talking point that black voters in particular and black men in specific are running to the Republicans. No. We're not running to the Republicans. We're simply walking away, as we should. When you go to a restaurant and sit down at the table, and the waiter decides to ignore you, you don't just sit there giving compliments to the chef and recommending that your friends and family go there anyway. You do the opposite. You leave, and you tell everyone you know to avoid the place. Kamala's entire political strategy was based on running on abortion. That's what she had as the big headlines and the banners at all of her rallies that very few people wanted to go to. Well, reproductive freedom. Man, ain't anybody worried about that. When they made the decision that they were going to die on the hill of abortion and die on the hill of ignoring us, they had to go all in trying to get white female voters. That's who Kamala was trying to appeal to. That was their desperate Hail Mary. They wanted young white women in particular and white women in the suburbs who were supposed to be their stopgap to replace all the black voters they knew that they weren't going to get. Now, I told you for years now that strategy wouldn't work because those white women are the same ones who willingly overlooked Trump's grab 'em by the you-know-what remarks and his rampant predating on white women, and they still voted for him anyway. And don't kid yourself with those white media reports about those white suburban women supposedly being so gung-ho for Kamala. That's what I told you for years. Hillary was a white blonde woman, and those white female voters didn't go all in for her either. So you actually think that they wanted to see an Asian woman become the first female president of the U.S.? Those white suburban women, they already had to sit through seeing a black man become the first non-white man in the White House for 8 years. They put their race before their gender, because those white female voters that the Democrats were desperately hoping to reach, they don't owe their position in the world to their gender. They owe it entirely to their race, and they know it. It's not abortion that gave them their position in the world. It was white supremacy, and they know it. So they can vote to legalize abortion and then on the exact same ballot turn right around and vote for the very Republicans who outlawed it in the first place. Double standards is what passes for morality for the dominant society. The Democrats' hopes all hinged on pushing abortion constantly in the hope that that would get white women to turn out in huge numbers and that it would also lift their down ballot candidates. But instead, catering to everyone except for black voters has cost Democrats the White House and the Senate, and Republicans that got the House of Representatives, they're going to keep that. So it was a clean sweep for the GOP. You know, times like this, I'm looking around wondering, where's nigga Jim Clyburn, America's favorite sharecropper, at? He was whining 4 years ago because young black voters demanded the thugs in blue be punished for their crimes. He was out there just bubbling and stumbling instead. But stop sloganizing! Stop sloganizing kills! He blamed the young black voters for his hand-picked punk Jamie Harrison losing his election. Well, what happened in the end? Those young black voters that Jim Clyburn was attacking, they handed Democrats control of the Senate. And they put Raphael Warnock in office. They handed the Democrats a clean sweep of the House, the Senate, and the presidency. These were the people that he was attacking. He was attacking them while they were handing the Democrats complete control. So what does that tell you about Jim Clyburn? This time around, though, those young black voters stayed home. So nigga Jim doesn't have to worry about anyone causing the Democrats trouble with the police unions that they want the support of. After all, the Democrats put all their eggs in an abortion basket, but it turned out the basket had nothing but holes in it. So how's it working out for you, Jim Clyburn? Thanks to senile geezers like Clyburn who ignored reality and insulted the base, Republicans have easily retaken the White House and the Senate. And it didn't take days for that to be determined either. All that crap, it's going to be days before we know the winner of the election. Nope, turned out we figured out the same night, as usual. So the current Democrat leadership has lost to the guy who tried to overthrow the government 4 years ago. You have to be some kind of stupid to pull that off. Democrats listen to the Jim Clyburns and the rest of the idiots and the congressional black talkers who are cocooned in their little all-white enclave up north. They're sitting there sipping their mint juleps and telling themselves how brilliant they are because they give patronage jobs to their unworthy brats. And they're sitting here sucking off the teat of the white supremacist beast. These guys tell themselves they're so brilliant. How brilliant do they look now? Obama attacked black voters for demanding the police be punished. He was the one who started the trend of using woke as a pejorative. He started that. He did more than anyone to push that talking point and to popularize it. And in the end, that scumbag wound up demanding that those same young black voters that he was insulting as being woke, he was demanding that they turn out for him. And it turned out that the woke vote stayed home. But then again, Kamala Harris has also attacked young voters too in the past as being stupid. Look it up. You can find videos about that easily about her doing that. Far from being the nail-biter that the white media have been telling us it would be for so many months, instead the outcome was never truly in doubt. The orange man took the lead and never let go. The battleground states were no battle at all. Trump took Georgia again. He took Pennsylvania again. Okay, let's be more specific, shall we? After all, in America, there's really no blue states, only blue cities. So how did Trump win Georgia this time? After all, he lost it 4 years ago, right? It's because Atlanta stayed home this time, just like they did in 2016. It's not that Democrats won Georgia 4 years ago. They won Atlanta 4 years ago. Atlanta turned out 4 years ago. You know, I'd love to know where Andrew Yang is at right now. 4 years ago, he was claiming that it was Asian voters who handed Democrats the victory in Georgia 4 years ago. He was saying that claptrap. Well, here was a golden opportunity to show the so-called clout of the Asian vote. All those headlines talking about the rising power of Asian voters, here was a golden opportunity for them to demonstrate it. Asians turned out in numbers, but of course there's not enough of them to turn an election, no matter how many of them turn out. That's just math, folks. So it turns out it wasn't the Asian vote that handed Democrats the victory after all. It was the black vote as usual. And when they say Pennsylvania went for Trump, that means Philadelphia stayed home. The black city of Philadelphia stayed home. That's why James Carville, the Cajun Skeletor, famously observed that Pennsylvania is Philadelphia in the east, Pittsburgh in the west, and Alabama in between. If you're going to make Pennsylvania be a blue state, at least for the night, you're going to need black voters to pull off that hat trick. Wisconsin also went for Trump, which means the black voters in Milwaukee stayed home. Wisconsin is a purple state, but it can become blue for a night if black voters turn out in large enough numbers. And Michigan also went for Trump. Now, I'll give Michael Moore some leeway on this one. It was obvious that his phony optimism and pretending this time is going to be different. No, he was the guy who back in 2016 was doom and gloom and telling Democrats, hey, I got news for you. Trump is gaining in Michigan. I know that state. He's going to win. This time around, he was trying to talk up the Democrats' chances of winning. And that's because this time around, black voters had handed Democrats the governor's mansion in Michigan and both houses of their state legislature. So I guess as far as Michael Moore was concerned, he would roll the dice, flip a coin, and it was fair to middling chances the black vote would turn out this time again, even though in his heart he knew that wasn't going to happen. But in the end, reality has the last word. Michigan went for Trump, or rather the black voters in Detroit and Flint stayed home. And can you blame them? Democrats did absolutely nothing to protect these black cities in Michigan from Rick Snyder's racist takeover of their cities, which was nothing more than a white supremacist scheme to circumvent the 15th Amendment. And then Democrats did absolutely nothing to stop a genocide in Flint with the water poisoning, which did more than anything to turn black Michiganders against the Democrats. Obama came to town because this atrocity happened on his watch. And when he showed up, did he come with the DOJ in tow? Did he bring any of his bigwigs and heavy hitters and say, we're going to start putting people in prison for this, there's going to be prosecutions for this, and there's going to be billions of dollars coming into these cities to revitalize them and to fix their freaking infrastructure? Did he do that? Did he announce any sort of legislative full court press, or did he just come to town, pretend like he was drinking some Flint water, and then immediately leave and never speak about them again? He left the black residents of Michigan to die. So the next year, they stayed home. And even after black voters gave Democrats control of Michigan's governor's office and the state legislature 4 years ago for the first time since forever, Democrats still prioritized abortion and illegal aliens and everything except black residents. That's what happened in Michigan. You had that governor, Gretchen Whitmer, pretending like black folks don't exist. She thought she was going to give some occasional lip service, and even then, she didn't want to do it very much. This woman has a problem with black people. So what happened was the black voters proved they got a problem with her. Understand that it's not just Obama. Ignoring the black vote is a core pillar of the Democratic Party platform. All the talk about how this was going to be a nail-biter, that all turned out to be bunk. You could tell after the first 2 hours how this election was going to go. The first election returns started coming in around 6 p.m., as they always do. Trump took the early lead, and you could see that the GOP states were all on the same page, and they made it a point to get their voter totals in as early as possible. By 8 o'clock p.m., Trump was already up to 177 Electoral College votes, while Kamala was still stuck in the double digits. All night long, the Twitter shills, Democrat plants, and other suck-ups have been watching as their pathetic dreams of begging for a job in a Kamala White House slipped away. It just goes to show how much of a failure the Biden-Harris years have been. And as for political strategy, Trump went on Twitter and Joe Rogan, and that did far more good for him than the pathetic bootlicks that Kamala Harris chose to run to. The road to the White House doesn't run through the breakfast schlubs or the shade room. You have to be some kind of stupid to lose to the guy who staged a coup 4 years ago, got himself impeached twice, has a ton of lawsuits and prosecutions against him, has already been convicted a number of times. How do you lose to that guy? Because you run away from your base. And by the way, Trump will be spending the next 4 years shutting all that down. What they needed was for this guy to actually be buried under those lawsuits, and somehow he dug himself out of his own grave. Gotta give the devil his due, I suppose. The takeaway from this will be that the orange man officially got his mojo back. He has a mandate, that's what you call it when you win the White House and both houses of Congress, and unlike the Democrats, Trump is going to be working on making sure he produces for the people who put him in office, unlike the Democrats. And his claims of a stolen election 4 years ago will now be seen as validated, even though the same election officials who said that he lost in 2020, and in most cases also said that he won in 2016, these people are still in the same jobs they had before. But that's not going to matter. Ignore your base. Don't be surprised when they ignore you. As always, the white media wanted to convince everyone that there was some sort of horse race going on, but as the early returns came in, they predictably began changing their tune and reporting that the country was hungry for change. I noticed AP headlines about that. As the early returns were coming in, the white media was always, the country's hungry for change. Yeah, that's not good news for the incumbent, which is what Kamala Harris is. So what that showed was, yeah, they knew what the results were going to be. They already knew that all their headlines about, Trump is in trouble, Kamala's surging. No, they knew what the truth was all along. They used their headlines as a way to manipulate the masses in order to manufacture the outcomes that they want. When Michael Bloomberg ran for president, the white media infamously reported that black voters were supporting him and that black voters were not bothered by his stop and frisk policies. And what did the white media base that propaganda on? It was because Bloomberg had paid some bootlicking Negro politicians like former mayor of Houston, Sylvester Turner, to stand on stage with him and say he's a good guy. The white media figured black people were a bunch of simpletons who would simply believe that stop and frisk didn't matter, not even to black voters, and that the only ones who were bothered by it were just those online agitators in the new black media. No other black people cared. Well, a little while later, Bloomberg made the mistake of going to a black church in Alabama, Brown Chapel AME Church, where he wasn't able to vet the audience or front load the pews with buck dancing suck-ups. And when he showed up there, half the congregation stood up and turned their backs on him. That created exactly the opposite of the optics that he needed. A few days later, after that humiliation, Bloomberg dropped out of the race, and the same white media outlets like USA Today, who lied and said stop and frisk didn't bother black voters, they now had to do an about-face and admit Bloomberg had been taken down by black voters, and it was stop and frisk that did it. This is the reality. They know exactly what the facts are, but as far as they're concerned, they have the power to conjure magic. They have the ability to invent reality out of whole cloth with their headlines as they see it. And we've seen them attempt the exact same ploy this time around. The white media tried to lie and claim that after Obama was finger-wagging at black men, that suddenly black men were moving for Kamala Harris. The lie, the inference being that Obama lectured and verbally abused black men and insulted us and called us names, and black men moved to vote for Kamala as a result. They actually had a headline saying that, the damned lie, to push the idea that insulting and disrespecting black voters, black men in particular, because we've been the ones leading the charge on this, that this would be an effective strategy to get black voters to stop making objections. You gotta browbeat them more. You gotta finger wag at them, lecture them, insult them, wag your finger at them. The white media was openly pushing the line that blatant abuse of the black community, that's how you get these dumb niggers to vote your way. Oh, and on a side note, the white media outlet that was lying and saying that black men were trending towards Kamala after being verbally abused, is NPR, government radio, which means they might as well be an auxiliary of the White House Communications Office. And the poll that NPR was using as the basis for that headline lie, it was organized and paid for by the NAACP. I already told you about the other NAACP polls. So you have these fossils from a bygone era paying for polls that are basically crafted to say what the NAACP wants them to say. Well, that out-of-touch group of dinosaurs is going extinct. All those gray beards and old heads who only care about making sure they get their Social Security checks and Medicare. This is who the white media chose to signal boost and repeat what they said. So, were they right or wrong? See, they know they're lying. What they don't know is whether you'll buy it. But if you follow the black media, you won't. The white media has a monopoly because white power gave it to them. So they know that whenever they report on anything, they signal boost it because they control the most eyes and ears. So they can't talk about us because that would be to spread our message to more people, which means they would become more popular. So they try to ignore us in the futile hope that this will make us go away, or at the very least, it'll slow our progress. They've been wrong on both counts. All their headlines have said that Kamala is a political rock star. She's unstoppable. She's raising record amounts of campaign cash. I told you what a fraud that headline was. It was just a copy and paste of all the headlines that they ran about Hillary in 2016. Oh, she's getting all these billionaire dollars. Same thing they said about Hillary in 2016. Hillary Clinton has record-breaking early voter turnout. And now they've achieved the exact same results as Hillary. All the insults, all the disrespect, all the finger-wagging, everything from Obama calling black men sexist to Biden lecturing black voters that we need to go to try to work with other groups who come from countries that practice anti-black racism. They were bold with the disrespect. They felt that after we handed them the Trump defeat in 2020, that we had been mentally broken. That's what they thought happened. They knew that we didn't want to vote for Biden, but we did it anyway, even though he wasn't offering us a doggone thing. As they saw it, we voted for Obama twice in a row after he routinely publicly insulted us. And the 2016 election, as they saw, well, that was just a momentary blip now. Black voters just needed to blow off some steam, as Dr. King put it. But the blatant open racism of the Trump administration made it where black voters were absolutely frustrated and put out with that guy. They wanted to give him the middle finger. So as the Democrats saw it, well, in 2020, that was the political reset button being hit. And now black voters were back on the treadmill to nowhere, and things would go back to what they were before. They just had to wait us out. That's how the Democrats saw. All we had to do was just wait those niggers out, and now things go back to the same old same-o. In 4 years, I only saw one redeeming act from the Biden administration, when they filed lawsuits against those banks for redlining. That's it. Now, these banks have been doing it for decades. They didn't stop back in the 60s. Why didn't Jimmy Carter go after them? Or Bill Clinton? Or Obama? Why didn't the Democrats craft or push any legislation to make it easier to punish those banks or do anything to hold them accountable? That was the one substantive thing that they did. Go after redlining banks, not because it changes the status quo, as much as it gave us numerous proven examples. They had to admit to what they did. These were proven examples that the racial deprivation we've talked about in, during, and before the civil rights movement is still around today. Nothing's changed. This will be important for our reparations claim. We just have to make sure we point out that these other groups are not included. So the orange man is on his way back to the White House to steal whatever utensils he didn't rip off last time, but I'm going to hazard a guess. The American democracy, which is a contradiction in terms, by the way, will still be here in 4 years. The predicted fascism that these white leftist entities have been promising us and telling us is going to happen is not going to materialize, not because Trump's a good guy, he isn't. But because, as we've been telling you, the so-called Project 2025 and other stratagems is the same old GOP crap we've seen them peddling for decades. It's reprehensible, yes, but it's nothing we haven't seen or heard before. But there will be one good thing to come out of all this. With an unrepentant racist back in the White House, people who've been sitting on their behinds, they're not going to be able to go back to TV reruns. And they're actually going to be prompted to demand things like they were doing in 2020. The police have been murdering black people in greater numbers now than they did during the Trump years. That alone disqualifies the Democrats from office. But people haven't been in revolt this time because the ouster of the orange man lulled people into a false sense of security. It's the same reason why this country was on the verge of a revolution back in 2008, but pretending to confront America's cardinal sin with putting Barack Obama in office was their way of hitting the reset button. And all of those corporate crooks who wrecked the international economy, he let them go. That was the point they actually wanted to reach. That's what it was about. Defusing the revolutionary energy. People hit the collective snooze button 4 years ago and went back to bed, but they got the wake-up call from hell, haven't they? and the thugs in blue have been allowed to murder whomever they wish. So Republicans have retaken the presidency and the Senate. Uncle Clarence Thomas can now safely retire and live on Harlan Crow's front porch like the dog he is. I can promise you right now, one of the things that's going to happen is some of those old, decrepit right-wingers on the Supreme Court, they're going to go ahead and announce their retirement, because unlike the Democrats like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she wanted to make sure that she retired when a woman was president. We saw how that worked out. But Trump will now have the ability, since he controls the Senate and they're the ones who confirm Supreme Court nominees, he'll be able to go ahead and rubber stamp whoever he wants on there. And this being the case, they'll be able to put a bunch of young radical ideologues on the Supreme Court. And that being the case, even as they lose one state legislature after the next, they'll still have the ability to influence policy for decades for now, because they'll have people with lifetime appointments on the bench. We know what the Federalist Society's playbook is. But the Democrats have not been acting like they knew it. As far as they were concerned, it wasn't the Supreme Court they were concerned about. It was making sure they wouldn't have to do anything for black people. Well, they stuck to their guns on that one and shot themselves in the foot. Repeatedly. Now, what does all this mean for the black grassroots? What it means is we're going to have to start getting people of our own into the game. A lot of you have been thinking about running for office. Now would be a good time to start laying the groundwork for that. It takes on average about 2 years to set up a successful political campaign. So that being the case, the goal is not and has never been to simply sit on the couch. That was a slogan that we used simply to say what we would do this election cycle. The goal has always been to decouple our vote from a particular party and instead use it and focus it in directions that are going to benefit primarily and exclusively us. That's what the goal has actually been. You can't do that by being a loyal Democrat or a loyal Republican. That's the point for the people in the cheap seats who don't listen so well. This is going to call for political maturity on our part, and maturity means focus. A long time ago, I used to say that black unity isn't something that happens when a black person is murdered by some white supremacist. Unity is something that's supposed to happen every single day. Unity is supposed to be the norm, not some event that only happens under certain circumstances. It's very easy to band together when you got the Derek Chauvins and the other racists running around killing black people in the streets, but that's not enough. It has to happen on a day-to-day basis. So we're supposed to be using our vote for our exclusive benefit. Do not expect anybody in the white left or any of their shills or surrogates to applaud that. See, every other group, they talk about how they do things to benefit themselves, and people say, oh, the rising power of the Latino vote, the rising power of the LGBT vote, the rising power of the Asian vote. Black people sit here and say, we're going to do things in our interest. This is divisive. Yeah, there's a new radicalism. Yeah, very divisive, some of these people. That's what they say to us. So as black folks, we're going to have to tune out that noise as we've been doing and stay on our square. Elections are about what we're going to get. If there's nothing on the ballot for us, then there's no reason for us to vote for whoever's there. But we have to go beyond that. We got to start being proactive and putting things on the ballot. That's where this goes next. That's the next step. And speaking of next steps, as for today, do not let anyone take credit for what happened other than us. Kamala Harris's defeat was our doing. I started banging the drum against her 7 years ago with my now classic video, The Deadly Deception of Kamala Harris, which I will be reposting a better version of in the coming days. But we did this. The black vote did this. Nobody else. It wasn't Muslim voters. There's not enough of them to make a difference in an election. Not in Michigan, not anywhere else. See, Muslim voters actually turned out for Harris. Those people who were talking that uncommitted stuff, those people started announcing that they were going to be supporting Harris in the weeks leading up to the election. The only ones who didn't abandon their principles was us. So take a bow, black family. We showed the road to the White House doesn't run through the abortion clinic. It doesn't run through any illegal alien encampment on the border. It doesn't run through AIPAC. And it damn sure doesn't run through any bootlick media or any gang of shills, plants, and suck-ups, be it the breakfast schlubs, or be it some idiots at a barber shop, or be it the shade room or anybody else. It runs through the black community. We made a strategic decision, and that decision was that we would show just how much we could punish them, because we are already in a bad boat to begin with, mainly because it's a boat that they put us in. We showed that we're not going to be scared. We don't make decisions based on fear. We make it based on our interest. You ignore the black vote, you prioritize everybody over us, you disrespect us, and you will pay. That's the lesson to take away from the elections of 2016 and 2024. All the white media lies was just them trying to paint their own reality, a desperate attempt to try to continue to conjure magic, to try to once again invent reality out of whole cloth. They didn't realize that their bag of tricks was empty, and their ability to conjure magic won't work. They're not going to be pulling any rabbits out of a hat this time. Now, don't expect them to admit this. They're never going to admit that they're irrelevant, and they're also too terrified to admit to our relevance. But when you saw them sitting there attacking us, that was all the admission you needed. They're not going to admit to your power, but you better make sure that you do. You tell everyone the black vote did this, and only the black vote. They want to be mad good, because the only way that they're going to be able to get happy again is to make sure that we get what we are owed. Not merely on reparations, but on everything. Even if slavery had never happened, we would still be owed a share of the nation's bounty precisely because we're citizens. Everybody else gets it. We got illegal aliens getting taken care of, and they're not even citizens. So what does that tell you? What that tells you is that there is a program at work by both political parties to marginalize black people for the sake of strangling us out of existence. And what we're showing is, you put us into a corner, we're going to fight our way out of it. This is the new normal. So let it be known. The black vote is finally at long last not just waking up, but standing up. And all of these bootlicks and sock puppet Negroes that white power has set up over these decades, everybody from Negro Jim Clyburn to the breakfast schlubs, and all of their new would-be bootlick puppets like the Shade Room and others, all of these fools who have been sitting here, yes, queen, all the rest of that crap, these guys have proven to everybody now that they are irrelevant. You can deal with them if you want, but they don't move the needle. Who moves the needle is the black grassroots. And anybody who doesn't like it, tough. There's a new generation rising. And that being the case, this generation is not interested in having friends. We got something far better than friends. We got family. And that family has been neglected for far too long. So we're taking care of home. You know, like everybody else does. What we're not going to be doing is trying to be winning any friends or trying to get a pat on the head from the white media. Joe Biden 4 years ago said that he had black America's back. Instead, he let the cops shoot us in the back and didn't do a damn thing about it. So we're learning who our friends are and who they're not. And we're also learning that politics is not about making friends, it's about making power. So that's what we're doing. This is and must be the new normal. When you have a strident, resurgent black empowerment movement, one that puts us at the center of things, one that says nothing moves unless it benefits us, that's what it must be. Because for 500 years, we've allowed this cesspool of nothing moves unless it hurts black people. So we're overturning all of that. And don't expect people to be happy about that. They're going to be angry. You got to get comfortable with the fact that people are not going to like black empowerment because everybody's been eating off of it. You've had all these white supremacists eating off of it, all of these white adjacent groups eating off of it, all of these people who are classified as non-white and yet they're eating off of white supremacy, they're eating off of anti-black racism. Well, it's time that we call their little would-be feast to an end. Make sure you let everybody know the black vote did this. We're the reason for this and nobody else. Some Muslims come along and want to claim that it was about Gaza. No, it was not. Somebody else wants to come along and claim that, well, it was about this or that. We didn't get our transgender bathrooms. Don't let anybody peddle that lie either. The white media tried to barricade themselves behind a wall of their own phony headlines. This is what happens when you deny reality. What we have done is exactly the kind of noisy and big move that we needed, but it didn't happen by accident. It happened because we've been focused and relentless. We made it a point to step on toes. The black media would not let you forget what your interests are and who's been working against them. This must continue. We have to reassert a strident and hard-nosed approach to our power, one that is far more aggressive than everyone else. You want to change the political discourse? You have to change the things you say within it. So the battle cry going forward must remain the same. No reparations, no tangible policies, no vote. No kidding. Good day, and be one.